All right, we're back. Our final segment this morning is going to deal with an executive order and the theft of rural and agricultural lands for the institution of United Nations Agenda 21 that threatens to destroy America, and how the stars are aligned purposely by this government in an attempt to try to destroy the ability of Americans to be property owners in the heartland. Because if they can take away our farming ability, if they can take away our right to property and our right to own the fruits of our labor, then they can effectively destroy this nation. And so we're going to talk about this for a moment, and I want you to take a few minutes and see if you can't look this up, and then I'm going to post this article up at the end of on this YouTube video, but also on our website and on Facebook. There's an article out there in PPGG, so it's the title of it is Executive Order 13575, the theft of rural and agricultural lands for UN Agenda 21. And there's a video on there that you should probably watch. But here's essentially the deal. Obama has signed Executive Order 13575. Now, this isn't something he signed the other day. It's signed going back at least 2 years. But what it does is it establishes the White House Rural Council. And this is a council of the most aggressive agencies and departments in the United States government, which are working against the best interests of individual and private property and liberty rights in the United States of America. And what they are doing is, these are groups that are administrative agencies and or non-governmental organizations, NGOs. And in fact, many of them are actually created by the United Nations itself or funded by the United Nations or their supporters, these that are not government agencies. And the NGOs are supported by, some of these same, groups that are out there, including the Soros Organization and the Nature Conservancy and Audubon Society and all of these groups that are essentially taking the United States of America and looking at it like a roadmap of how they can isolate the center of the United States and turn it into wildlands. Now, we addressed this with the Blue Way, but what you have to realize is that we won the skirmish of the Blue Way, but trust me, folks, we didn't even come close to tipping the scales on the war, because we now know that there have been multiple MOUs signed around the Blue Way that gave the Blue Way life. And the Blue Ways, while they've retreated from that, at least in the Ozarks area, there still are 23 other locations that are going to get tagged with that thing. And basically what we have to realize is that this White House Rural Council is establishing domestic terrorism against the United States of America and the people who live in rural America. That is the goal. Realize who these people are. These members are the secretaries of the Interior, the Secretary of Agriculture, and the Secretary of Commerce. Now, we know that Department of the Interior was the creator of the Blue Ways. The USDA has an enormous sway and power over farmers and farming and agriculture in the United States. And the Department of Commerce, we know, uses the Commerce Clause as a weapon of mass destruction anytime they want to abuse your rights and liberties as an American citizen. But to make matters worse, these new groups contain, and there's a group out there called the National Invasive Species Council. And this was created by Clinton back in the 90s. All of these groups have one thing in common: the concept of sustainable development. And that's in a UN Agenda 21 program. Everybody, listening to this probably is aware of that. But if you're not and you don't know what Agenda 21 is, please educate yourself, because it's probably one of the things that will have the most impact in your life over the course of the next 2 decades. If we don't collapse under absolute tyranny. And even then, it will have a larger role to play in your life, because that's when, once we fall into the depths of fascism, you'll have even less opportunity to fight back against these kinds of things. But this NISC, National Invasive Species Council, incorporates not only Interior, Agriculture, and Commerce, but Department of State, Defense, Homeland Security, Treasury, Transportation, Health and Human Services, the U.S. Trade Delegation and U.S. Trade Representatives, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, National Aeronautics and Space, NASA, and U.S. Agency for International Development. Wow. What do all those people have to do with invasive species? I mean, let's talk about that for a minute. What does Health and Human Services and the U.S. Trade Representative and the U.S. Trade Council and the Treasury and the Department of Transportation have to do with an invasive species council? I'll tell you what they have to do. The way they approach this is like a gang. And I want you to think of this in the sense in which you understand that when they attack you, if you are successful defending yourself on one front, then they use another element of their skilled set of professionals, professional assassins, to take you down in another way. So if you defend yourself against the Secretary of the Interior on the Blueways, as an example, the next one that attacks you is the Department of Agriculture, and they do that by, figuring out some way to get in on your farmland or controlling your water supply or something else. And if they can't get you then they default to Commerce. And Commerce, of course, can be used the way that they currently interpret the Commerce Clause, which is a complete pornography of the original Constitution and the Commerce Clause that is as it's read in the Constitution, is that they can define anything as commerce. We know that to be the case because Obamacare is now considered commerce. Your failure to purchase insurance affects interstate and intrastate commerce, and therefore, under the Supreme Court ruling, you can be forced to buy something. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the first time in history that your failure to act is considered to have an effect on commerce. Isn't that incredible? Only a tyrannical fascist organization could come up with that kind of thought process. And the Fillmore, I think it was Fillmore or Fillard, I can't remember now, and I'm drawing a blank and I don't want to take the time to look it up. The original clause or Commerce Clause court case that changed everything was when this farmer who was growing his own grain to feed his animals, his horses and his cattle, was charged with affecting interstate commerce because he was not buying from the public supply of grain. In other words, his failure to go out on the open market and buy grain, instead he grew his own, affected commerce. And so that's how this Commerce Clause got so blown out of proportion. And this was back in around 48, I think, or 47. And I ought to do a whole expose show on that case because it is, I'm telling you, it is so fraught with treason and betrayal of the principles of the concept of the Constitution that, every one of those Supreme Court justices who was involved in that decision and voted for it should have been taken out, charged with treason, and then after a conviction lined up against a wall. But what we see here is that these agencies operate in a gang fashion. And each one of them has a special skill set or a special capability or wherewithal. And where we're looking here is when you talk about the Department of the Interior, they go after you where they can. The agriculture goes after you where they can. Commerce goes after you there. If they can't get you, they employ Treasury. And guess who works for the Treasury? You just binged the nail on the head. The IRS. And, that's long been a mantra of government. If we can't get you for actual crime, we get you for an IRS violation, and at least we get to remove you as a thorn in our side. Perfect example is Al Capone, right? Or that other guy, Gotti, who, died in prison. They can't get you for the crime because they can't get anybody to roll over and say, yeah, he committed a murder or this, or he robbed a bank or whatever the case may be. So they get you on tax evasion. Now, in my case, I was charged with a Title 26 IRS code violation that had to do with the fact that I hadn't paid a tax on a gun, which I didn't even know was illegal when they sold it to me. So go figure, but I spent 3 years in a federal prison over that. So you can't tell me anything about how they misuse the law to achieve their own ends, and nefarious ends they are. Their attitude is that the ends justify the means. And they couldn't care a rat's rear end how many dead bodies they got to step on to achieve their goal. You know, the Department of Defense and NASA in a rural council represents the greatest threat to independent and family farming and ranching and that we've ever seen. I mean, why does the Department of Defense have to get involved in ranching and farming? I don't understand that. How is it that NASA has anything to do with that whole topic? How is it that the Department of Transportation has anything to do with that? Health and Human Services. The U.S. Trade Representative. Here's what you do need to know. This is an invasion force of government invading the heartland of the United States of America. And they are coming here to wage war against American citizens, landowners, private property owners, businesses, farmers, and ranchers. Make no mistake about it. That's what this is all about. They're all included because they can essentially utilize their administrative agency authority, which they don't have. It's all extra constitutional. But if they fail to get you in a lawful fashion, in other words, for breaking an actual law, which they'd have a hard time doing, then what they do instead is they get you for violating a rule or a regulation that was instituted by one of these unconstitutional, extra-constitutional administrative agencies. And once you've done that, then they can fine you. And once you've been fined and don't pay, then they can prosecute you criminally. Get it? It's a circumvention of the rule of law and the judicial process and jurisprudence as accepted as the norm by all Americans for all known history. This is gangland style abuse, and there's no other way there's no other thing to call it. This is traitor territory and treasonous action on the part of these statists who are intent on doing one thing: getting control of you and your property. The BLM, Bureau of Land Management, the EPA, if they can't terrorize you into forfeiting your property based on threats and this, megalithic judicial system that they are in control of, which you can't fight against because they can beat you by financial attrition. You can't hire federal attorneys to defend you in case after case after case after case. I mean, most businesses and individuals don't have the wherewithal to do that. And if you try to fight it yourself pro se, you've got almost no hope. I mean, it's like sitting there and trying to take a 3-year-old and put them into the battlefield against highly trained troops. I mean, there's just no chance of winning that. And so basically, if they can't coerce you, threaten you, cajole you, and terrorize you into forfeiting your land and your property and your rights to it, or the wonderful magic underneath it of water and mineral rights, then they prosecute you, and they utilize these other agencies to do that. And they've endless supply of ammunition that they can pull out to fire at you. They move into attack from your flank, from your front, from your rear. These agencies just come on you and swarm you like a pack of wolves. This rural council is poised to move vast numbers of families and independent farmers and ranchers off of their valuable and productive property. They are using this council as a weapon of domestic terrorism against the farmers and the property owners of Heartland, Middleland America. Yeah, the flyover country. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the sad truth. What we have is a group of agencies, and this started way, way long ago. This is before even Clinton. But Clinton signed a ton of these executive orders and created a lot of these councils and so forth. And they've only grown in power and substance since then. And, now, of course, they've taken on a life of their own. Because they can pass changes to the Federal Register and create and promulgate rules and regulations that parade about as law. And there's nobody who's got a watchdog position on them. No one has any... Here's the way you have to look at this. Once they do these and they promulgate these rules, they've effectively bypassed Congress. And when you bypass Congress, you violated the Constitution, because the Constitution is very clear. Nobody, B-O-D-Y, may pass a law except Congress. And yet these administrative agencies are invading the heartland of America and committing terrorist acts against us by writing rules and regulations and promulgating them. And these rules and regulations have all the effect of law, but none of the color of law. None of the true color of law. And that is the problem. These agencies get funding from the federal government. And interestingly enough, there is a way to solve the problem, but states won't do it. Especially the state I live in, because the governor of Missouri, Jay Nixon, is a pathetic ideologue. But, you see, the right way to resolve this, and the way to address this issue, would be for the states to simply say, you have no authority here, and you're not welcome. And we don't want your grant money, but, furthermore, we're not going to spend money and feed you as the beast either. Who are these agencies? Well, Department of Agriculture, Commerce, Defense, Education, Energy, Health and Human Services, Homeland Security, Housing and Urban Development, Department of Justice, Labor, Department of State, Department of the Interior, Department of the Treasury, Department of Transportation, and Veterans Affairs. And each and every one of those agencies that I just mentioned has what? A sustainable development plan required by UN Agenda 21. Required by the self-same treaty that our Congress has failed to ratify over and over and over again. But see, in typical fascist mentality, they are bypassing Congress's refusal to ratify a treaty and implementing it through nefarious ends justify the means methodology. How are they doing that? Well, they're doing that by administrative regulations and rules, which create and foster the same regulatory framework that a signed treaty would have, but without the treaty. Is there any part of that you don't get? I didn't think so. Where we are right now is our nation has been usurped and stolen. All of the authority that belonged to states and the people has essentially been absorbed into this megalithic, monolithic federal government that is now the looming tyrant, the looming terrorist over and dominating the horizon and everything in all of our panoramic field of view. There is nothing that you can do without getting government permission or authority from in the first place. Everything about your life is regulated. Everything that you think you own, you don't own. Your land can simply be taken from you with a few strokes of a pen on these federal regulatory schemes. The EPA can march in and effectively ban you from utilizing your property in such a fashion that you're coerced into turning it over. It's nothing more than robbery at the point of a gun, except they do it at the point of a pen. That's the only difference, people. And if they can't get you that way, then they get you with withholding money from you, or they penalize you for some agricultural issue, or they nail you for a violation of the rules of commerce. rules and regulations of commerce, not law. They nail you down for, something related to education, or they decry that, you are Homeland Security has some special dispensation in your case. Or, look, the cases are overwhelming. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the sad status of where we are. Every one of these agencies is deeply entrenched in the principles of a sustainable development plan, which is required by Agenda 21, but unratified. So, the methodology by which they're going about this is the same one that you see the president implementing with relation to firearms, through executive orders and mandates, through policies and regulations and procedures that for all intents and purposes act like law, have the full force and effect of law, but bypass Congress. And I'm not giving Congress any benefit here. The likelihood is even if you did go to Congress, they would completely agree with it anyway. But you see, all I'm trying to point out is that we live under a treasonous scenario where all of the government and all of its power and all of its glory is armed and directed and focused at your enslavement, subjugation, termination, stripping you of your rights, your property rights, your land ownership. Remember, what is one of the number one planks of communism and socialism? The end to the right to private property. And I got to tell you, private property in the United States of America is a well understood maxim. Everybody gets it. But you have to realize that in vast majority of the world, private property rights don't exist. So the goal is to get us to fall in line with that. How? Well, through these abusive, treasonous acts of these agencies and these organizations that have been created, these councils. These stakeholders aren't stakeholders. They don't live here. They don't know anything about this. What makes them a stakeholder? What makes them a stakeholder is money and influence and the fact that they will serve a purpose that government can't serve. What is that purpose? Well, the stakeholders like the Audubon Society, the Conservancy group, they'll come in and they'll offer you money, private money, right, for land and get an easement on your property and that kind of thing. Then they turn that easement over to either government or they retain it and hold it in their locker bin, while government is actually giving them the authority and the power and the capability and the wherewithal to do this. And if you don't agree and acquiesce, then they call in the government dogs and say, make them do it. Listen, we're in so much trouble as a nation that this stuff is only the tip of the iceberg. We're seeing it in firearms policy. We're seeing it in freedom of speech. We're seeing it in freedom of religion. We're seeing it in freedom of your child's education. We're seeing it in the area of the Fourth Amendment rights on the NSA and the IRS being used as a weapon of mass destruction and the penalties associated with that. We're seeing it in the removal of your ability to have a Fifth Amendment claim to not incriminate yourself, because now just claiming your Fifth Amendment right isn't enough. Your silence is still enough to convict you in a court now. I did a whole show on that. Go look it up. And I'm not done with the amendments. Our Eighth Amendment right against cruel and unusual punishment, our 10th Amendment states' rights, all of that is being vacated in favor of absolute tyranny. And I cannot for the life of me understand why the vast majority of America cannot see what is happening all around us. It's like you're standing in the middle of a dust storm and your eyes are clogged with it, your nose is clogged with it, and you're saying, you're denying its existence, stating that you repeatedly that you are in a cool pool of water. It's insane. Who do you need to convince you of the truth? You're listening to America's Voice now. My name is Michael Evans. I'm your host here every day. Friday of this week, I will be off, and Monday of next week, I will be off. So we will not be doing a live broadcast show. I'll have podcasts up on our dial-in lines and so forth, and on our Roku box channels and such, because I'll be running out on a brief escape, shall we say, on a little vacation with my son. But So I'll be gone Friday, and I'll be gone Monday. There will be no live broadcasts. I'll put it up on Facebook and so forth and make you aware of it. Please find our website at americasvoicenow.org. Please find us our Facebook page at facebook.com/americasvoicenow. Please find this and every other program that we do live on YouTube at youtube.com/americasvoicenow. You can simply share links of those videos with your friends. If we talk about a topic that really hits a bullet for you, make sure you tell your friends and listen and invite others to listen. Thanks so much. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow.